remains of his grandfather, was both morbidly fascinated and repelled by the depending figure. The sight in Fisher's bedroom made him physically sick. It took a moment to make sense of the bloody mess on the floor beside the bed. It was a woman, although Wilson only glanced at the face, now cleaved and hacked into unrecognisable mash and bone. He bent double and vomited onto the mat at his feet. He didn't linger in the room, but needed the wall, spattered with blood, to support him on his way out. He hurried past the hanging man into the yard. Fisher was nowhere to be seen. "Peter!" he called hoarsely, his throat sore and his mouth filled with the acid taint of vomit. There was no reply. Wilson walked around the house. Where had Fisher gone with his murdered baby? He heard a sob and followed it to behind the outside dunny. Fisher was sitting propped against the toilet wall, the baby in his lap. There was something in his mouth. It looked like a candle. Fisher looked at Wilson blankly and struck a match. The fuse fizzed, and Wilson, knowing now that this was a stick of gelignite, backed away, but stumbled and fell. He heard the explosion before the obliterating darkness of unconsciousness overwhelmed him. Inspector Titus Lambert watched as Martin Sarong photographed the unspeakably awful scene at Fisher's farm. The 12-year-old boy who'd come upon the slaughter had been delivering mail and bread. Fortunately, Titus thought, he'd only taken in the hanging man and had bicycled to the post office in Nunawading, where he'd stammered out a description of what he'd seen. The postmistress had telephoned the police, and the machinery of investigation had been set in motion. The crime scene attendants had gathered and were waiting impatiently for Sarong to finish. Among them were detectives who were inexperienced in seeing the gruesome tableau of killing. The homicide division of the Victorian Police Force had been made a discreet unit just 12 months earlier in 1943. Its head, Inspector Lambert, was now grappling with the legacy of a case that had depleted his team, particularly those closest to him. Sergeant Joe Sable had resigned. So too had Constable Helen Lord. They were young, but Lambert had trusted each of them, and in Helen Lord's case, he'd admired her intelligence and skill. He'd seconded her into the division against the advice and directives of those above him. Lambert's critics now felt vindicated. The experiment of placing a woman in homicide had failed. "What do you see, Martin?" "I see what our species is capable of, Titus, and it sickens me more and more. You never get used to this." There was something in Martin Sarong's voice that Titus hadn't heard before. It sounded like despair. "No, Martin, you never get used to it. Murder is never just about the perpetrator and the victim. So many lives are tainted by it. This is a bad one, Titus." Lambert trusted Sarong's eyes almost as much as he trusted the close examinations of his crime scene specialists, the men who found evidence in microscopic analysis. Sarong's photographs had often guided him towards a vital clue. He'd been helped by Maud, his wife, whose analytical skills were subtler than his own. Titus kept nothing from his wife. If police command knew that Inspector Lambert took crime scene photographs home for Maud's perusal, he'd have been disciplined, demoted, or probably dismissed. For Titus, the risk was worth it. "Give me a thumbnail sketch, Martin." The bloke hanging from the rafters looks about 17 or 18. It's hard to tell, though. The woman in the bedroom is so disfigured. All I can tell you is that she's a woman and that the person who attacked her did it in a rage. The body behind the shed is only half a body. Forensics is going to have to find as much of him as they can. He's fairly intact from the waist down. There was an infant in his lap who weirdly escaped the worst of the explosion, and I'd say he or she was dead before the gelignite went off. I'm assuming it was gelignite. The baby's injuries are still very obvious, and I'd say they were inflicted with the same axe that was used on the woman. We're presuming that's the axe that's leaning against...